Wednesday, my fearless familia. What's up? I always laugh when I go to record an episode because I want to be like, what's up, guys? But I hate when I listen to people and that's what they're like. There is nothing more cringeworthy than someone getting on an Instagram story or some type of video being like, what's up, guys? Even though for sure I've done this before, for sure you've probably done this before. It's just the weirdest things that make me cringe. If you hear any kids also screaming outside, I'm not in the school, but I'm nearby a school. And let me tell you, these kids shout and scream like I have never heard people or children shout and scream. This is why I have decided to invest in a proper office space in London because I can no longer deal with listening to kids scream, which makes me wonder, how am I ever going to have a future family? But I think at some point I'll get there. This is a fun little episode that's just with me. I'll be back with a guest next week about entrepreneurship. There's so much stuff that's been happening, and I'm at a really unique time in my career, which I'll get into in this episode, especially if you've been following me for a while. So hopefully at times like this, or when I release an episode like this, you're able to see the moments where I've been able to not know what's going on and then get to this place where I know exactly what's going on and everything in between. And I think that's a really sweet spot about entrepreneurship. Before I get into the episode, just a reminder, there is a Be Fearless Summit in April in New York City. It is invite only. You have to RSVP to attend. You have to tell us who you are. So make sure if you go to the show notes and you want to come hang out, Anne Malam, who is the founder of Solid Core, is there. A little bit about Be Fearless Summit. I launched Be Fearless Summit when I was at Radio Disney back in 2018. And the first summit was with Drexel University in March of 2019. The reason I started Be Fearless is because I had been going to so many different networking events and I never felt like I was getting anything out of them. As a young woman, I felt like I was constantly surrounded by people who were significantly older than me. And I was never taught, like, what do I do at this event? So you go to an event, a South by Southwest, a CES, whatever networking event, and you're kind of thrown in the room sometimes, or you're listening to a panel and then you're standing waiting to talk to your dream mentor or boss and you freeze. What do you say to this person? Do you go to a networking event with a friend to make it easier? All of those things. And so that's how I came up with Be Fearless. So I had the idea, I made a deck, I pitched it out for a year, everyone rejected me. Then finally, I was at a conference speaking alongside Amal Clooney and Serena Williams at the Pennsylvania Conference for Women in 2018. And there was a woman who was standing at the Drexel University booth. I beelined for her. I word by word said this: I've got this idea, everyone keeps rejecting it, you probably will too, but if you ever want to host a women's networking event with the school, I've got this idea that I think is really cool and everyone else hates it. She was like, oh my gosh, that's actually pretty cool. Let's have a meeting. Fast forward, had the meeting through the first event. It was wildly successful. I was wildly stressed out. I had no idea what was going on. I had never thrown an event. I got Shake Shack, Headspace, Hulu, Netflix to sponsor, all by cold calling. Just shows you the power of getting out of your comfort zone. And so I was able to throw this bomb-ass event. And then over the years, I hosted them. I lost thousands of dollars. So to host a Be Fearless Summit, it costs close to probably $5 or $7,000. And the reason is because, number one, I am a one person, right? And I have to make a living. So the Alexa Curtis personal brand is what pays my bills. But these summits, I have to hire people to help put the schedule together, to find the speakers, to vet the speakers. There's phone calls leading up. We have to decide who's moderating. Then I have somebody on sponsorships trying to find brands to give us money to host the event. Then I've got a videographer, a photographer, all of that, my travel, my hair and makeup. And so it costs a lot of money. So the last two that I did were with CCSU in Connecticut and UConn in Connecticut. Those were the two first paid summits in 2022. And quite frankly, I said I would never do a summit again after those two, because even though the college paid, I still was in this same cycle of I'm not making enough money where this is worth it. As much as I love to see these people come together and feel inspired, and I feel inspired, I'm just losing money and it wasn't scalable. And so I've come up with this new formula. It works. 5-6 years down the line, I have figured out how to crack the code, how to make it work, how to make money and not lose money. like praise for the gods for an entrepreneur when you finally figure out that money idea, and this is it. So that's what's going on. Of course, subscribe to Stay Fearless or Die Trying. Also in the show notes, I am launching a webinar with the premium subscription. So what you get with that premium subscription is a 30-minute intro phone call with me. There's an option if you want to do additional coaching calls, which most of the subscribers do, where we go into more talk about startup, whatever it is you're building. You also get access to the community of professionals. We have a group for that on Telegram and a bunch more stuff. So it's pretty freaking cool. But today I wanted to focus solely on entrepreneurship and how to know if you want to be an entrepreneur. I just hired my first part-time employee for Alexa Curtis Consulting, which is blowing up. I am kind of in a bit of awe about the progress of this company. I have always been doing PR behind the scenes for years, just good money, and I have a lot of connections, quite frankly. I never really liked it. And so initially when I launched Alexa Curtis Consulting, I was like, oh, it's basically just putting a name behind what I've been doing for some time, but also realizing that my strengths now of an entrepreneur have certainly strengthened. I'm very good at cold pitching. I'm very good at knowing sponsorships. I understand how to get creators brand deals. I understand how to scale a newsletter. I understand how to scale a LinkedIn page. And so I find I'm really an expert in that field. So I wanted to be able to fuse in elements of what I'm really good at, along with people that I've met along the way who are really good at their job, video editors and podcast production people, so that I've put together basically this full service agency, which goes back to the same thing that was part of why I started Be Fearless. There was a missing part in the industry for those kind of career conferences at the time for young women. The same way that I feel like there is a missing part of the industry of business and startup that is specifically helping founders who have achieved success in their brand build out their personal brand. And so that's the core focus. However, we have all of these kind of a la carte services that go along with personal branding. So even if you don't necessarily want to hire me to help you, perhaps you need a really good editor who's affordable. Perhaps you need a good podcast producer. I've put together the best people for these kind of jobs. But anyway, I hired Molly. Hi, Molly, if you're listening to this. She had originally reached out to me on social media and asked to work for me. And at the time, I had not really launched this consulting business. I had not taken on the clients that we've since taken on. And so we had some phone calls and whatnot for a few weeks. Closer actually probably to 2 months. And then finally now I officially hired her to come into the office and help with the clients. And she said something so sweet. She said, I feel like I'm working for my big sister and my boss every day, because she wants to be an entrepreneur. And I asked her, which is something that I ask anyone I hire, what's your end goal? You want to work for me, or you want to be in this world of crazy startups, but why? And a lot of the times it's like, you want to be an entrepreneur. There's something about this lifestyle in this world that piques your interest. I think there's a huge difference between saying you want to be an entrepreneur and saying you want to be a creator or an influencer. And the reason I say there's such a big difference is because the difference in scale with my kind of brand compared to somebody who's just waking up every day and posting content. And a lot of who you follow on social media, they're probably in the latter bucket. They're waking up every day, they're posting content. They don't necessarily see this as a scalable brand or company, but you're getting out of it what you can until the world finds somebody better to follow or to engage with. There is a timeline for creators and influencers, unfortunately. There are ones like The Blonde Salad, Chiara Ferragni, Ami Song, Chriselle Lim, who all started years before I started and have honestly really monetized and built huge brands and also launched other products. We Were What, Danielle Bernstein is a good example of this, Ariel Charna's Something Navy. They've all gone on to launch other brands because you get to a certain point where you realize, and I realize this, and that's why I've decided to embark into more consulting and branding and whatnot, is because there's a timeline for any influencer's career because of the way that the social media world evolves. So I was really glad that when Molly came on board, she wasn't sitting down being like, I want to be an influencer. She said, I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't know what I want to build yet, but that's what I know. And so that's why I was inspired to do this episode, is because I think there are certain ways to know if you're fit for this. You, number one, have that bug inside of you, and that's something that I see in her. I see there's an enthusiasm and an excitement about it that I find is a bit different than, for example, if I'm talking to someone who wants to be a TikToker. They're very self-absorbed, which is fine. I mean, look, I'm the same way. This is what I do for a living. It's not a bad thing, but there's an element of like, you kind of want to be famous or you want to get the most amount of views and likes, but you don't really know what it is that you're building towards. having that mindset does not mean that you necessarily want to do the daily grind that an entrepreneur does. From where I was in 2018, pitching Be Fearless, getting the Disney show, leaving Disney, getting into another world of startups, leaving that startup. I mean, I have been on a roller coaster for years. And it is very hard. It's incredibly hard and it is mentally taxing. I can tell you that something I didn't expect that comes with success is a new level of anxiety and more of in kind of a new level of anxiety, but also this level of imposter syndrome. I'll give you an example because I took on a client last week and I had to call my business coach immediately because I was freaking out in a way. I mean, the amount of money that I was asking for felt like foreign nature to me. Keeping in mind, I came from no money. I came from no connections. Like, I come from working class parents who raised me with very little money. So when I'm looking at sometimes numbers for myself, I'm like, oh my God, this feels foreign to me. Because I feel like, how am I worthy of this? Of course I'm worthy of it. I've worked my ass off and I've had so many highs and lows for 10 years. But it's this out of body experience. And so the more successful you become, the more you have to realize there's a new set of rules that come along with that. And so it's a different roller coaster now. You're not flying up and down at Six Flags, high, low, but now you're going high and there may be a low. And you have to be willing and ready to tackle that more in a different way than you would when you're so used to the high and low, because you now have more responsibility and you're looking at more money. Just because you're making more money doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to feel more satisfied. I think the more money you make, you really have to sit down and, number one, come up with a solid budget, but also come up with like, okay, how can I maintain this growth? The downside of entrepreneurship is there will be many months, depending on what you're building, where you may have a month where you make 50, 60, close to 100K. There may be a month where you make nothing. And so keeping in mind that as you're building something, you have to be ready to adjust immediately to not making anything the following month if you had a really good month. And that's a weird place to be in. I can tell you with this particular client that I negotiated this deal with, that was incredible, and that my coach helped walk me through it, because there was parts of it I really didn't understand when it came to formulating the proper proposal. I had to check myself for a second and I had to think, okay, this would be great if we can get this to last 6-10 months. If this could expand to be following 1 month, amazing. However, there's a strong possibility this will not be the amount of money every single month. And so because of that, I am not going to go buy a crazy expensive handbag. I am not going to go on a trip. The first thing I did when I got the money is I put $1,500 in my Roth IRA to try and max it out for this year. I bought 2 small handbags and took myself on a little weekend trip. And I gave my dad money for his birthday. That was really important for me to do. And I felt like I was able to do it because financially I said, okay, this is how I made this much money. This is now going to go and set aside for my rent. This is going into my savings. This is my fun money. When you're also going through the hiring process, which is something I'm doing now, that's another financial element you have to think about it. So I am now hiring people to work for me and I have to train them, which not only takes my time and energy and is super annoying. If you're a CEO listening to this, hiring people sucks. It is mentally taxing. I am exhausted in 2 weeks by doing it because it is a constant grind already in the day-to-day. And then you've got people you're hiring and onboarding, but they're going to do things wrong. They're going to mess up. A lot of times I find that people don't ask questions. The more curious you are, the more questions you have, the better, because you're no longer wasting my time. The worst thing that happens is when somebody, I was listening to a podcast with Emma Grede on Jay Shetty's podcast, and I'm obsessed with Emma Grede. Her, Sarah Blakely, Sheryl Sandberg, and Michelle Obama are the only 4 public figures / influencers, celebrities I follow or listen to what they say. Those are just my people. And she said something in this episode that I've really resonated with, especially as I've been hiring. She said the worst thing you can do when you get a job is go and tell your boss you couldn't figure it out. The reason is because there is always a way to figure it out. I had a test for Molly actually on Monday, and she came into the office on Monday, and I think Sunday night or like Monday in the middle of the night, I sent her an email because I had an idea, and I said, I need you to show up, and I sent her one photo from an Instagram screenshot. I said, I need you to show up to the office by the time I'm there with something to make a photo exactly like this. I had no idea if this girl was going to be able to figure it out. I was like, I don't even personally know they even have stores to get this kind of product from in London. But I showed up to the office. She had it done. She had the receipt, good to go. And I just said, thank God somebody who knows what they're doing. Because you could have done one thing, right? Which is be what an entrepreneur is not, and that's a follower and not know what you're doing. Or you have to take the reins. And that goes into another point is if you want to be an entrepreneur, are you comfortable being a leader? A really great book to read is called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I started and tried to read this book years ago. And then when I was in my LA apartment last month, I found the book and I repicked it back up. And now I'm 3/4 of the way through. Everything makes so much sense to me. Thank gosh, because I tried to read it initially and it was very hard. But are you somebody who can immediately know the answer to something, knows when to walk away from something, and knows how to be a leader with whatever you're pursuing? If you answer those 3 questions and you're like, no, 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 then you are probably not a fit to be an entrepreneur. Because as a founder, you have to be incredibly specific and conscious of your time and other people's time, but you also have to be really willing and able to say yes or no to something quite fast. I will tell you that I make decisions very fast. I am very open with myself and honest about if I think something is a fit for me or if I'm able to do something. I've pushed myself over the years in certain places with certain proposals. I've sent over numbers where I could have gotten higher. I've sent over proposals where I wasn't the right person for the job, but I wanted the money. But at the end of the day, I knew that I would figure it out because I am not the person who would go and call and say, hey, I can't figure this out. I would exhaust all of my options and then I would either go to the client, the person, whatever, and say, I would also never say I can't figure this out. I would say, hey, I found a better way to do this. Ding, ding, ding. It's not you can't figure it out. You have found a better way to do it. Do it. Even if it means you haven't figured it out, you have found a better way to do it. And that is what you tell your boss, your mentor, the person that you're working with or working for, instead of saying that you couldn't figure it out. Because if there is a will, there is a way. The hardest part about entrepreneurship for me at this stage is the imposter syndrome. I actually have been experiencing it a lot more lately. And I think for me, I get really caught up sometimes in the numbers, not the financial numbers, but I get caught up in the social media numbers. I still feel like I'm at a point, unfortunately, where I have to play that game of like proving to people, oh, I can do this, or I'm a fit for this job or this campaign, even though I only have 20 whatever 1,000 followers on Instagram and this on TikTok, even though I know that the products I sell, you guys buy, you love it. And that's why I want to be the face and the figure for you to say, until I'm at that point where I have millions of followers and you're buying the products still, that I am able to tell you I have made a full-time company over the years off of this without having millions of followers. I don't think you need millions of followers. I also don't think you necessarily want millions of followers. Most of the founders that I know or that I work with, especially with this consulting company, are not necessarily looking to be the next celebrity. There's a lot of fame and notoriety that goes along with successful founders who have large companies. For example, I'm reading Paul Van Doren's book. He's the founder of Vans, right? Like he wrote a book. He's got a name behind Vans, him as a personal brand. But what stands out first is the company is Vans. You don't necessarily think of Vans and think of Paul. You probably think of Vans and you think of the cool sneakers that you like to buy at the store. And so most founders are not wanting to be in the limelight. And that's why a lot of times you'll find that most founders are not super active on social media. They're not doing what I do. And I think I'm in a really cool position because I started with the background in entertainment. I started with the background with the blog and with Fashion Week and with the Disney show. So I know how to work the camera. I'm very good, and it's where I feel very natural being in front of the camera. But also I have the business mindset behind me, where most of the time behind the scenes, I'm either doing something with spreadsheets, I'm either doing a lot of the cold calling you guys see, or I'm just making business deals or figuring out how to help my clients scale their business. And it's not always fun. Entrepreneurship is not as glamorous as you think it is. So if you are an aspiring founder and think you're going to spend 90% of your time pitching VC investors and sitting on private planes, that's not the reality of this. Most founders, and if you start reading founder stories and their books, it took them years to figure out what they were doing. It took years of hustling, financial stress. If you have a family and you want to be an entrepreneur, you're in a very different boat because you have different questions than I have to ask myself. And that's why I think your 20s is the perfect time to pursue entrepreneurship or do something like Molly did, cold outreach someone you want to work for and get a sense of what it is you actually want to tackle, so that as you get into your late 20s, perhaps even early 30s, you're at a point where you're able to say you either want to work for an entrepreneur or you want to be an entrepreneur, and this is the sacrifices you're willing to make. I have made so many sacrifices along the way, but also I don't have anyone that is standing in my way, and I can be very selfish with my time because it's just me. And that's why there's a reminder that I want to give most of you with entrepreneurship is that the amount of time it takes, add 5 or 6 years, because it is just going to take a really long time and there is a slow build. Now, if you don't know what idea you also want to pursue, that's an obstacle. My advice for you is if you don't know what idea you want to pursue, then do something like anytime I haven't figured out or couldn't figure out what I was doing, I would get a large whiteboard piece of paper, turn off my phone, do not disturb, everything is off. This is usually the best done on a Saturday or a Sunday. I really like Sundays to be my creative days. I read a lot, I drink a lot of coffee. I do like mindless things or sometimes things like this, these kind of exercises. And on this whiteboard, not on your phone, not on your computer, you're going to write out what you like to do. So anything you like to do. Maybe you like to run. Maybe you like business. Maybe you like to cook. Then you're going to write out what you don't like to do. Ideally, if you are somebody who has had a job before or has had an internship or studied some type of degree in college, you're able to pick something out of those experiences and really find one thing that you really like that you did and that you really like or that you didn't like to do. I'll give you an example. I hated for years doing PR. It is a world where there's a lot of money in PR, but I think PR just sucks in general and people in PR kind of suck. So just so you know, with AC Consulting, I mean, a lot of what we do is PR, but because of this exercise, I was able to find a way where I actually now enjoy it. I like seeing the clients get the success. Whereas when I was doing it for years with no direction, I was doing it, I was making money, but I was hating it. So you want to write down what it is that you've done that you like, something that you don't like that you've done. For me, what I wrote down at the time of this exercise I did last year was PR. But what I loved doing was public speaking and personal branding and the Alexa Curtis brand. Then you want to find something that is like the opposite of that. So I tell most of my clients who I coach now to do this exercise. Something the opposite of PR would be personal branding. Something the opposite of the Alexa Curtis personal brand would be, oh gosh, I don't know, finance or accounting. I'm trying to find something. This is probably a bad example, but hopefully you get the gist. And if you don't, reach out to me and I'll send you the exact exercise. And then below that, you're going to really want to flush out what did you like about this and what did you not like. When I fleshed out the PR element of this exercise, I realized what I didn't like is I didn't like the cold emailing. I didn't like the having to follow up. It was monotonous and it took time. So as I expanded Alexa Curtis Consulting to bring in the public relations branch of it, because I'm very good at it, I found somebody to do that shit for me so I can do what I do best, which is call up their producers, which is work with the clients, which is sit with them on interviews. And so I was able to find something that is what I'm good at and what makes money, but is also the opposite of what I hate doing so that I can do what I like and then you outsource it. So that is a really great exercise to do if you don't know what it is that you want to pursue. And I also want to remind you that if you look at the evolution of my career, I started as a fashion blogger when I was 12. When I was 16, I wrote a post on Huffington Post that went viral, and it was about my eating disorder. Ever since I was a little kid, always wanted to be famous. I always wanted to be an actress or a singer. I'm a good actress, but I'm not a good singer, unfortunately. And so I decided I wanted to be a model when my mom told me I wouldn't be an actress or a singer. Thank you, mother, for crushing my childhood dreams. And of course, I had an eating disorder from my modeling days, wrote the article, it blew up. I was in high school at the time. Now, that one particular article that I cold emailed Huffington Post and landed is what turned my career around. So once I realized, okay, I'm not going to be a model. I want to eat cupcakes and I don't want anyone ever putting a tape measure around my little tiny 16-year-old waist again. what can I do with this? And so I had 2 years in between 16 and 18 where I was still doing the fashion blogging, but I started a LinkedIn page. I started doing a little bit of PR because I realized, okay, I'm able to get myself doing interviews and writing gigs. Why can't I do it for other people? Then when I was 18, I got asked to speak on a panel about social media and mental health based on that original article I wrote when I was 16 with Talkspace, the online therapy platform. I showed up at that conference. I was the youngest person to speak on this panel. It was amazing. I started a nonprofit after that with a therapist I met on the panel. The nonprofit space was hard. We became a 501c. We opened an office in Boston. And it was a cool experience for me, but the nonprofit space was too complicated and too hard. And also because it wasn't paying my bills, I was having to dabble in 100 other things, just freelance and creative wise, in the Alexa Curtis personal brand. Somewhere in between there, I started a podcast. And that's what I ultimately, a few years later, sold to Disney. Moved from Boston to LA, pitched the show to Disney, landed Fearless every day on Radio Disney, started Be Fearless because of this idea that I had, hosted the first event, forgetting to include that I pitched it out for a year and I was rejected. So during that time, I was working at Disney, hosted 5, scaled the last 2, took a break, now going back, doing it in a way that works for me, along with launching the Alexa Curtis Consulting, and the Alexa Curtis personal brand is still what pays my bills. So I've just condensed my years of 12 to 26 into probably a minute and a half on this podcast to tell you that the more you can dabble in, the more you can try, and the more questions you can ask, the right questions, not the wrong questions, the better entrepreneur you will become either now or in the future. And so along the way, I had no idea what I was doing. I only, quite frankly, recently understand exactly what I'm doing and how I'm going to get to the next level and how I'm scaling this consulting business and how I can do Be Fearless Summit and make it work for me. And I didn't know the answers to any of these things a year ago or 2 years ago or 7 months ago. And so the highs and lows, again, of entrepreneurship and being comfortable with saying, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out. Also being comfortable with being alone as I've moved to a totally different country. Today is actually the first day where I felt really lonely. I don't know if it's because I saw a friend last night who was here from New York and we hung out and then he left super fast, like he was only here for the day and the night, or because I'm just living in a totally different country trying to build a business here, that you're going to spend a lot of time alone and there are going to be times where there is no one to call. The amount of times where I have called my mom or my dad and they have made me feel worse because they don't even know what to say back to some of the things that I'm saying or the questions that I have. You can't blame them. It doesn't make sense half the time being an entrepreneur, these kind of questions. And so if you're somebody who doesn't like being alone or needs to be constantly surrounded by uplifting people, this journey also may not be right for you. A lot of people get into business with a co-founder. I personally have always done stuff on my own, and I've done more of the solopreneur lifestyle while hiring people to work for me. So I feel like I have a team. But again, right, I don't call somebody who works for me and say like, hey, I had a really shitty day, or hey, this client bailed, or hey, this client hasn't paid. That is not who I call or speak with about to my team, right? And I don't really call my girlfriends and say like, hey, I'm chasing a client for this money. I mean, I don't. You just don't do that. And so most of the time I'm sitting at my office alone, building something, focusing on something on phone calls, to where on the weekends, I feel like I'm just coming down from what the week was. And so as much as the money is great and the excitement around entrepreneurship is great, there's a reality side about this, which is just that as you're building something, you are going to feel really alone. It may feel very isolating. And if you are somebody who needs that constant uplifting support, then perhaps you are meant to work for a startup and be in that culture, but you don't necessarily want to be a founder on your own. That's why there are so many groups out there. That's why I have a business coach. That's why I started in an element of Be Fearless that has that community element, because I was very aware that a lot of people need that substance. They need that constant connection with people, but they also don't necessarily want to be constantly speaking to someone. You may just have some questions along the way or certain things that you want to ask someone, and that's totally fine. And so that's where it's really great to have a coach or be a part of a Be Fearless or whatever kind of company or community that you find out there, because that's where you're going to get that substance from. And so it's worth the money. And I'm telling you that with even the premium subscription model that Stay Fearless or Die Trying has, paying $18 a month to have access to a community where you feel like you can really talk to people and meet people and get potential clients and also feel less alone is a very valuable as an entrepreneur. So whether you decide to join mine, or maybe you find another one that you want to join that's in your price point, or perhaps you want to spend thousands a month and join something like a Hampton, regardless of what it is, I highly encourage you, even knowing what your idea may be, to find that kind of community and join it, just so you have that support along the way. So I hope that that helps many of you figure out entrepreneurship and if this is the right world for you. And I also want to remind you that you really, really have to think about entrepreneurship as a vehicle, but it is not the end goal. If it doesn't work for you right now, perhaps you are a fit to do it in a year or 2 years. There is no timeline to entrepreneurship. And I've had so many times where I have been like, I'm going to give up on this idea, and then I come back to it and it works for me. So don't forget that. And don't be too hard on yourself either. If you can't figure out what your idea is now, there may be one day where you're walking down the street, or you go to a conference, or you cold call someone, and all of a sudden, that's the idea. I will see you guys next week for a new episode of The New Unfiltered.